The most ruthless betrayal never comes from an enemy. It comes from your own flesh and blood, smiling as they pour you champagne. After 4 exhausting years, my grandmother's gentle words shattered that illusion, revealing their bottomless greed. There is no room for weak tears or forgiveness here. Instead, I built a flawless financial trap in the shadows. Their greed started this, and their greed will be their executioner. Watch closely as every piece falls. Hello, wonderful viewers of Vivian Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to operate. So if you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can pay for their living expenses and continue creating these revenge stories for you. You can easily make a donation by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Samantha Stevens, and I am 26 years old. The evening air high above Seattle was crisp, but inside the glass-walled rooftop restaurant, the atmosphere felt impossibly thick and suffocating. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over linen-draped tables, illuminating a celebration that felt more like a perfectly staged, high-budget play than reality. We were gathered here to celebrate a milestone that had quite literally nearly killed me to achieve: my newly minted doctorate in biotechnology and my official acceptance into the fiercely competitive and prestigious Nova Genetics lab. A cacophony of expensive laughter echoed around our private table. My older sister Chloe and her husband Brad were eagerly holding court. They were draped head to toe in the latest designer fashion, ensuring everyone in the room knew they belonged there. Chloe wore a custom silk dress that likely cost more than a year of my rent, and Brad's bespoke suit caught the ambient light every time he shifted in his velvet chair. They raised their crystal flutes of vintage champagne over and over, beaming with radiant practiced smiles, flawlessly playing the roles of the incredibly generous, supportive older siblings who had supposedly been my emotional rock through graduate school. I sat across from them, managing to hold a forced, brittle smile on my face, though every single muscle in my body screamed in protest. I was physically and mentally hollowed out. The past 4 years had been a brutal, unrelenting blur of manic studying and chronic sleep deprivation. I had worked 3 grueling part-time jobs just to keep my head above water, pushing myself to the absolute brink of physical collapse. My home was a decaying, drafty apartment in a high-crime neighborhood where the police sirens never stopped, and I had been meticulously counting every single penny just to survive another week without starving. But the crushing poverty was not just a natural byproduct of being a struggling graduate student. It was a suffocating condition engineered by the very people clinking glasses so joyously in front of me. For years, Chloe had been feeding me a steady, calculated diet of guilt and panic. She constantly reminded me that our grandmother, Beatrice, was rapidly depleting her life savings due to exorbitant, unexpected medical bills. Chloe insisted with tears in her eyes that we both had to step up and make sacrifices. So every single month, without fail, I scraped together $500 from my pitiful wages and transferred it to Chloe. It meant skipping meals, walking miles in the freezing rain to save on bus fare, and shivering through the brutal winters with no heat, all to do my part to help support Grandma. Grandma Beatrice herself sat directly across from me at the elegant table. She had flown in from the Napa Valley just for this graduation dinner. She wore a simple, unpretentious, but undeniably elegant dress. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her eyes crinkled warmly as she looked at me. She smiled, her gaze taking in my painfully thin frame, but her eyes shone with absolute adoration and respect for my resilience. Strangely, she looked incredibly healthy and vibrant, a stark contrast to the frail, financially ruined woman Chloe had vividly painted her to be over the phone. Brad stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute to command the table's undivided attention. He delivered a booming, charismatic toast, loudly praising my fierce, almost punishing independence. He talked at length about how I had clawed my way to the top with nothing but pure grit, refusing to take the easy way out. He looked down at me with a sickeningly proud smirk, as if my intense suffering was a shiny badge of honor he was personally pinning on my chest. As Brad finished his glowing speech and sat back down to a chorus of polite applause from the surrounding tables, Grandma Beatrice leaned forward. The restaurant's ambient jazz music seemed to fade away entirely as she reached across the pristine white tablecloth and gently enveloped my trembling, calloused hand in her soft ones. "I am so incredibly proud of you," she said, her voice carrying a soft, affectionate clarity that instantly cut through the noise of the room. "And I am so glad that the $3,000 I sent you every single month helped you have a comfortable life these past 4 years, my sweet girl." The entire world seemed to screech to a violent, sickening halt. The air in the restaurant instantly froze, heavy and dead. The glittering, practiced smile vanished from Chloe's face, as if it had been violently slapped off. Across from her, the heavy crystal wine glass slipped right out of Brad's suddenly limp fingers. It hit the edge of the table and crashed onto the hardwood floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. I did not jump at the sudden noise. I sat perfectly still, my hand still resting under my grandmother's warm palm, while the reality of her gentle words struck my exhausted brain like a brilliant, terrifying bolt of lightning splitting a dark sky. The sound of the shattered crystal on the hardwood floor should have been the starting gun for a massive family blowout. A normal person would have screamed. A normal sister would have flipped the linen-draped table and demanded the truth right then and there. But I am a scientist. When presented with a catastrophic anomaly, my defense mechanisms do not default to hysteria. They default to clinical observation. I kept my facial muscles perfectly locked, maintaining a mask of pleasant confusion. I shifted my gaze from the broken glass to my sister and brother-in-law. For a fraction of a second, the glittering masks fell away. The look that passed between Chloe and Brad was the naked, visceral terror of a prey animal caught in a trap. That single, fleeting look of pure panic was the only empirical data I needed. Chloe recovered first. She let out a high-pitched, forced laugh that scraped against my ears. "Oh, Grandma, you are so sweet and generous," Chloe chirped, though her voice vibrated with a thin edge of desperation. "But remember what your doctor said last month about your memory slipping? You always get those old accounting ledgers mixed up in your head nowadays." Chloe waved her hand dismissively toward an approaching waiter, desperately trying to sweep the truth under the rug. She looked at me, her eyes silently pleading for me to play along. I could have destroyed her right then. But a seasoned researcher knows you never expose a volatile element to oxygen until you are ready for the explosion. I smiled and squeezed my grandmother's warm hand gently. "Chloe is right, Grandma," I said, keeping my voice soft and steady. "Do not worry about the numbers. The emotional support is what really matters. Thank you for always thinking of me." The lie tasted like ash, but the effect was immediate. The stifling tension evaporated. Brad let out a long, audible exhale, sinking back into his velvet chair. The color rushed back into Chloe's pale cheeks. They honestly thought they had dodged a bullet. They believed their perfect family facade remained intact. They had no idea that behind my calm eyes, a bloody, horrifying puzzle was rapidly piecing itself together. As the dinner dragged on, my brain ran the numbers with brutal efficiency. $3,000 a month, 12 months a year, 4 solid years, $144,000. That was the massive financial safety net my grandmother had lovingly woven for me. She had sent it through a family trust account that Chloe legally managed, and Chloe had swallowed every single cent of it. But the equation of their betrayal was far darker than simple theft. They had not merely stolen my lifeline, they had actively bled me dry. They had fabricated a heartbreaking story about our grandmother's failing health to extort $500 from me every single month. Over 4 years, that amounted to $24,000. I had scrubbed toilets, skipped meals, and sold my blood plasma to send them that money. My malnutrition, my bone-deep exhaustion, and the nights I cried from sheer hunger had directly funded the designer silk dress Chloe was wearing right now. My literal misery had subsidized their luxury vacations and expensive champagne. Hours later, the heavy deadbolt of my dilapidated apartment door clicked shut. The freezing draft bit at my skin, but I did not shiver. I stood in the cramped bathroom and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a biological response to grief, but I was not grieving. What I felt was absolute clarity. My dark eyes stared back at me, as cold and unyielding as a surgical scalpel. Throwing a hysterical tantrum at a rooftop restaurant would have resulted in an ugly scene and a few gasped apologies. Screaming does not balance a corrupted equation. I realized that loud, chaotic anger never brings true justice. What I required was a masterstroke. I needed a complete, sophisticated, and totally devastating destruction of their lives. Less than 24 hours after the dinner, while Chloe and Brad were busy playing important executives at their respective offices, I boarded a short morning flight to the Napa Valley. I did not call ahead. I simply showed up at Grandma Beatrice's sunlit estate. When we sat down at her rustic oak kitchen table, I did not cry, and I did not raise my voice. I treated the situation exactly like a critical peer review at the laboratory. I presented the raw data. I slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood. Inside were my official bank statements from the last 4 years, alongside the aggressive, manipulative text messages from Chloe demanding my $500 every single month. Grandma Beatrice put on her reading glasses. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the kitchen was the sharp rustle of paper as she flipped through the catastrophic evidence of my poverty. I watched the color completely drain from her face, only to be replaced by a terrifying, flushed crimson of absolute rage. The gentle grandmother from the restaurant was gone, replaced by a fierce matriarch who realized her eldest granddaughter had ruthlessly weaponized her love. "That vicious little parasite," Grandma Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet fury. She immediately slammed her hand on the table and reached for the landline telephone. "I am calling my legal team this very second. I will have Chloe and that slick husband of hers dragged into court before the sun goes down." I gently placed my hand over the phone receiver, pushing it back down into the cradle. "No, Grandma," I said firmly. "Lawyers mean endless depositions. It means they will have time to hide the assets, play the victims, and drag this out for years in civil court. I do not want a messy, prolonged legal battle. I want total, clinical annihilation." She looked into my cold eyes and slowly pulled her hand back. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Keep feeding the snakes," I replied. "I need you to authorize the transfer of the $3,000 to Chloe's trust account on the 1st of the month, exactly as you always have. Do not change your tone on the phone. Do not give them a single reason to suspect the environment has changed. I just need a little more time to map out their vulnerabilities." With my grandmother entirely on board, I returned to Seattle and immediately went to work. Tracking money is not so different from sequencing a complex strand of genetic code. You just have to isolate the anomalies and follow the mutations. Using the first installment of my generous signing bonus from the Nova Genetics lab, I bypassed the cheap online background checks and hired a top-tier private investigator who specialized in forensic accounting. I handed him everything I knew about Brad and told him to dissect my brother-in-law's entire financial anatomy. A week later, the investigator handed me a heavily encrypted digital dossier. The results were not just surprising, they were utterly pathetic. Brad was not the brilliant, self-made entrepreneur he pretended to be at every family gathering. His so-called business empire was a rotting house of cards. The data revealed that he was drowning in massive, unmanageable debt. He had taken heavily leveraged loans to day trade volatile cryptocurrencies, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of months. He had also dumped a massive fortune into speculative commercial real estate right before the market completely tanked. His credit cards were maxed out to the absolute limit. The sickening truth finally crystallized in my mind. The money they were stealing from my grandmother, combined with the cruel $500 they extorted from my minimum wage paychecks, was not just extra spending cash. It was their absolute life support. It was the only liquid cash keeping their massive mansion from slipping into immediate foreclosure. My blood, sweat, and starvation had been the only things paying the exorbitant interest rates on their fraudulent lifestyle. I sat in the dark glow of my computer monitors, analyzing the financial ruin of my enemies. A sloppy, emotional person would have confronted them with this information, demanding an apology. But I understood the foundational rules of behavioral psychology. Brad and Chloe were infected with a terminal case of greed and a desperate, blinding need to recoup their massive financial losses. They believed they were smarter than everyone else. They were incredibly arrogant and fundamentally desperate. That desperate greed was their fatal flaw. It was the absolute perfect bait. I opened a new, highly secure document on my desktop and began to draft the blueprints of a financial trap. I was going to construct a customized, irresistible illusion. I would build a mirage so spectacular that they would willingly, eagerly hand over every single remaining asset they possessed, rushing headlong into their own grave with bright, greedy smiles on their faces. I reached out to Marcus, a brilliant former undergraduate classmate who had long ago traded the sterile environment of the science laboratory for the cutthroat world of corporate law. He was now a ruthless, highly successful attorney operating a practice 3 states away, specializing in corporate restructuring and asset management. I needed a financial vehicle, and I needed it to be completely impenetrable to the naked eye. Over the course of 3 painstaking weeks, Marcus and I meticulously constructed a ghost entity from the ground up. We named it Apex BioVentures. Using my extensive industry knowledge, I provided the technical framework, while Marcus drafted hundreds of pages of dense, hyper-technical legal jargon that looked utterly intimidating to a layman but was structurally flawless. We established an immaculate corporate website, complete with beautifully rendered stock photos of pristine laboratories, fake executive biographies, and glowing testimonials from non-existent medical professionals. It was a masterpiece of corporate camouflage. It looked exactly like the kind of exclusive, aggressively wealthy venture capital fund that only invited the absolute elite to the table. However, possessing a perfectly constructed trap is entirely useless if the rat does not know where the cheese is located. I needed to feed the information to Brad in a way that felt entirely organic. Brad spent every single Saturday morning at an exclusive country club, desperately trying to rub shoulders with men who were significantly wealthier than him. Through a junior researcher at my laboratory, whose wealthy father frequently played in Brad's golf group, I carefully planted a highly confidential rumor. The narrative I designed was beautifully simple and scientifically plausible. I had my colleague's father casually mention on the 14th hole that he had just secured a quiet backdoor buy-in with a private firm called Apex BioVentures. He nonchalantly dropped the crucial bait, whispering that the fund owned a revolutionary synthetic protein drug currently sitting on the desk of the government regulators, virtually guaranteed to get fast-track approval in less than 90 days. Once that approval hit the public markets, early private investors were mathematically guaranteed a minimum return of 300%. The bait was perfectly calibrated for a desperate man secretly drowning in terrible financial decisions. A guaranteed 300% return was not just a handsome profit for Brad. It was a miraculous, divine lifeline that would wipe out his crippling cryptocurrency debts and save his precious mansion from the bank. Exactly as I had hypothesized, Brad bit down on the rumor so hard he nearly broke his own teeth. Within 48 hours of that golf game, Marcus alerted me that Brad had frantically reached out through the encrypted contact portal on the Apex BioVentures website, practically begging for a meeting with a firm representative. Marcus played the role of the aloof, highly selective corporate broker flawlessly. He initially rejected Brad outright, coldly citing that the fund was strictly closed to outside money and only accepted referrals from Tier 1 investors. That calculated, brutal rejection drove Brad completely insane with desire. When Marcus finally, reluctantly agreed to send over the preliminary investment portfolio, Brad was absolutely hooked, entirely blinded by the dazzling illusion of infinite wealth. To buy into the minimum threshold that Marcus had arbitrarily set, Brad and Chloe needed massive capital they obviously did not have in liquid cash. But greed is a spectacular, terrifying motivator. Driven by the horrific prospect of losing their high society status and fueled by blinding arrogance, my sister and brother-in-law executed a financial maneuver of breathtaking stupidity. They secretly took out a massive second mortgage on their sprawling luxury mansion, leveraging every single brick of their home to the absolute maximum limit. They aggressively liquidated their heavily depleted retirement portfolios, drained their joint checking accounts, and most satisfyingly of all, they pulled out every last cent of the stolen trust fund money my grandmother had sent over the past 4 years. They scraped together every ounce of their material existence to pour into the ghost fund. While they were frantically mortgaging their lives away, I decided to add a sprinkle of psychological seasoning to their impending doom. I called Chloe on a Tuesday evening, making my voice sound exceptionally small, exhausted, and pathetic. I told her that I had picked up a 4th tutoring gig and had managed to secure a high-interest payday loan just so I could send them an extra $1,000 this month. I told her I knew Brad was working on a huge business deal and I wanted to support my amazing family in any small way I could. "Oh, Samantha, you really do not have to do that," Chloe cooed through the phone, though I could practically hear the sickening, greedy grin stretching across her face. But Brad is on the verge of something absolutely monumental, a massive paradigm shift in our portfolio. We will make sure to remember your little contribution when we hit the jackpot, sweetie. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance was physically nauseating, yet incredibly validating. They truly believed they were the untouchable masters of the universe, graciously accepting the pathetic pennies of a peasant sister, all while using her stolen inheritance to fund a magnificent mirage. The climax of this meticulously orchestrated operation arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Through Marcus acting as the faceless legal intermediary, Brad and Chloe signed the final legally binding investment contracts. They were so utterly consumed by the prospect of a 300% return that they did not even bother to have their own lawyer read the microscopic fine print. By signing the documents, they legally agreed to a catastrophic risk liability clause that explicitly authorized the fund to liquidate and absorb their entire capital contribution in the event of a total project failure, waiving all rights to litigation. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the bank wire transfer cleared. I sat in the sterile break room of the Nova Genetics lab, watching the screen of my encrypted laptop. The digital numbers ticked upward in a matter of seconds. Every single dollar they owned, every piece of equity in their house, and every cent they had bled from my veins securely landed in an offshore holding account that I anonymously controlled. The heavy iron door of the cage had just slammed shut, and the key was safely in my pocket. They were officially, legally, and entirely ruined. They just did not know it yet. Exactly 8 weeks after the bank wire transfer cleared, the trap was set to spring. Chloe and Brad were hosting an obnoxiously lavish anniversary party at their sprawling estate overlooking the water. Caterers in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of imported caviar, and a live jazz quartet played softly in the corner of the cavernous living room. This was not just a celebration of their marriage, it was deliberately designed to be Brad's grand unveiling. It was his desperate moment to brag to his wealthy friends about the imminent, miraculous payout of his brilliant new investment. Grandma Beatrice and I arrived precisely 1 hour late, making a highly calculated entrance. We did not look like the pathetic, exhausted charity cases Chloe always painted us to be. I was wearing a tailored emerald silk gown I had purchased with my own hard-earned signing bonus, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Grandma Beatrice walked beside me in a stunning navy blue suit, her head held high, radiating the quiet, terrifying dignity of a woman who knew exactly what execution was about to take place. The contrast was incredibly poetic. The expansive room was buzzing with the manic, nervous energy of people desperately trying to impress one another, while my grandmother and I moved through the crowd with the deadly, deliberate stillness of an apex predator slowly circling its trapped prey. Chloe spotted us immediately and rushed over, her fake smile practically plastered to her face, dripping in diamonds that my absolute starvation and my grandmother's savings had helped finance. "I am so glad you both could make it to our special night," Chloe gushed, pulling me into a rigid, perfumed hug. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the cold anticipation of a scientist waiting for a chemical reaction to finally boil over. As the evening wore on, the expensive alcohol flowed freely, and Brad's toxic arrogance swelled to a blinding crescendo. He gathered his country club buddies and several prominent local investors near the sweeping grand staircase. He was practically vibrating with smug excitement, holding a heavy crystal glass of scotch in one hand and compulsively checking his expensive watch with the other. "Any minute now, gentlemen," Brad projected his voice loudly, ensuring at least half the room could hear his triumphant announcement. "You are all about to see what real visionary investing looks like. A completely proprietary medical patent. Guaranteed government approval. I am expecting the official confirmation of the initial payout tonight." He was so deeply entrenched in his own fabricated delusion that he had practically planned how to spend the imaginary millions. The antique grandfather clock in the grand hallway struck 9 o'clock in the evening. Right on cue, Brad's smartphone buzzed aggressively in his tailored pocket. "Ah, there it is," Brad announced dramatically, pulling the phone out and holding it up like a glittering trophy. "The email from the firm. Let us see just how many zeros we are adding to the family portfolio tonight, shall we?" He dramatically swiped the screen to open the secure message. I watched him closely from across the room, savoring the exact agonizing millisecond his reality completely shattered. The smug, victorious grin on his face did not just fade, it violently collapsed. All the blood instantly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. His eyes darted frantically back and forth across the illuminated screen, reading the cold, clinical legal text Marcus had specifically drafted for this exact moment. The email did not contain a summary of massive profits. Instead, it was a formal, merciless notice of total corporate liquidation. It stated in brutal, unambiguous terms that Apex BioVentures had been officially dissolved following a catastrophic failure in the regulatory approval process. Furthermore, due to the explicit waiver of liability and the extreme high-risk clauses he had blindly signed without reading, his entire capital contribution had been legally absorbed to cover the fund's outstanding institutional debts. His account was permanently locked. His money was gone. Every single cent of his leveraged life was entirely wiped out. "No!" Brad gasped, the word escaping his lips like a dying wheeze. "No, no, no. This is a mistake. This is a massive computer error." He frantically tapped the glass screen, desperately dialing the secure contact number for his broker. He held the phone to his ear, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device onto the marble floor. Through the quiet hum of the sophisticated party, the harsh, automated voice of the cellular provider echoed loudly from his speakerphone. "The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected and is no longer in service." "Brad, what is it?" Chloe demanded, pushing her way through the confused, whispering crowd of guests. "What is happening? Tell me right now." Brad was rendered completely speechless. He gasped for air in rapid, ragged bursts, staring at his wife with eyes dilated by a wild, uncomprehending dread. Chloe violently yanked the device from his quivering hands to examine the illuminated display herself. A primal, blood-curdling scream ripped from her lungs. It was the naked, agonizing cry of a woman awakening to the realization that she had just hurled her entire existence over the edge of a precipice. The jazz band faltered, the upright bass player missing a note, before the music died out completely as dozens of wealthy, elite guests turned to stare in utter bewilderment at the couple completely breaking down in the center of the lavish room. The chaos was deafening, the panicked whispers of the guests rising like a tidal wave. This was my exact cue. I smoothly detached myself from the shadows and walked directly toward the small stage where the band had been playing. Every step I took was deliberate, unhurried, and completely devoid of any mercy. I stepped up onto the wooden platform, tapping the silver microphone twice to ensure I had the absolute, undivided attention of every single person in the massive room. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear, completely steady and devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "If I could please direct your attention to the main wall." Earlier that afternoon, I had discreetly paid a very handsome sum in cash to the catering company's audiovisual technician. At my verbal signal, the technician immediately hit a button on his control console. The massive motorized projector mounted on the ceiling whirred to life, casting a brilliant, blinding beam of white light across the darkened room. The guests murmured in hushed anticipation, likely expecting a touching, romantic slideshow of wedding photos or expensive vacation memories. Instead, the enormous 100-inch screen illuminated the room with the stark, undeniable black and white text of official, highly confidential bank records. The very first slide was a terrifying masterclass in financial forensics, blown up to a massive scale that absolutely no one could possibly ignore. On the left side of the glowing screen were the highlighted, certified transfer statements from Grandma Beatrice's local bank in the Napa Valley. $3,000, month after brutal month, year after agonizing year, routed directly into the supposedly secure family trust account. On the right side of the screen were the corresponding outgoing transactions from that exact same trust, exclusively managed and authorized by my sister. There were no hospital bills listed. There were no emergency medical payments. Instead, the brightly highlighted red arrows pointed directly to massive charges at luxury fashion houses, exorbitant exclusive resort fees in the Maldives, and massive panicked wire transfers directly into the volatile cryptocurrency exchanges that had just swallowed Brad whole. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Chloe desperately gasping for air as the undeniable, documented proof of her vile, parasitic existence was broadcast for all of high society to witness. As the horrific reality of the bank statements washed over the silent crowd, I reached into my small evening clutch. I pulled out a single heavily stamped piece of crisp white paper and held it up for the entire room to see. It was the official state business registration for the corporate entity known as Apex BioVentures. "Brad," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence, "you really should have had your legal team read the fine print. You see, the investment fund is completely legitimate and fully compliant with federal law. I know this for a fact, because the signature right here at the bottom, registering the chief executive officer, is mine." Brad let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, taking a stumbling step backward as if I had physically struck him. "I did not steal a single cent from you," I continued, my tone clinically detached. "You eagerly signed a contract that included strict, zero-tolerance clauses for investors utilizing fraudulent funds or engaging in money laundering. Because the initial capital you injected was mathematically proven to be stolen from my grandmother's trust, the contract legally allowed the fund to liquidate your entire contribution. Every single penny has been legally seized and transferred into a new, heavily guarded trust account solely in my name and Grandma Beatrice's name. I simply took back the 4 years of life you ruthlessly drained from me, along with a highly appropriate penalty fee. The sheer psychological weight of my words finally snapped Chloe's fragile mind. Her face contorted into a mask of ugly, feral rage. She let out a piercing scream and lunged toward the stage, her manicured hands curled into claws, desperate to tear my throat out. "You vicious little fraud!" Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs. "I will have you arrested!" She never made it to the stage. Grandma Beatrice, moving with a speed and fierce agility that completely defied her age, stepped directly into Chloe's path. With a sharp, resounding crack that echoed loudly across the cavernous marble room, Grandma Beatrice delivered a vicious, open-handed slap directly across Chloe's cheek. Chloe crumpled to the floor, holding her reddened face, staring up at our grandmother in absolute whimpering shock. "You do not get to speak about the law, you vile girl," Grandma Beatrice said, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. She slowly opened her elegant navy blue handbag and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She tossed it onto the floor right next to Chloe's trembling hands. "That is a federal subpoena," Grandma Beatrice announced, her gaze shifting to Brad, who was currently slumped against the sweeping staircase, openly weeping. "For the past 2 months, my legal team has been quietly cooperating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. We handed over every single document detailing your extensive wire fraud, your embezzlement, and your pathetic attempts at tax evasion. In fact, if you look out your massive bay windows right now, you will notice that federal agents have been patiently waiting outside your iron gate since the moment the caterers started serving the appetizers." Right on cue, the heavy oak front doors of the mansion were pushed open. Men and women in dark windbreakers bearing bright yellow federal acronyms stepped into the grand foyer, their expressions hard and uncompromising. The destruction was absolute and total. By the next morning, the massive bank had officially foreclosed on the heavily leveraged mansion. Chloe and Brad lost everything. Their money, their fake honor, their home, and their freedom evaporated overnight. They were immediately indicted and are currently facing decades in federal prison for massive financial fraud. Unsurprisingly, every single one of their wealthy, elite friends immediately blocked their numbers and cut all ties. 3 years have passed since that spectacular night. This morning, the crisp, salty air blows gently across the expansive balcony of my luxury penthouse apartment, a home I purchased in full using my own legitimately earned wealth. I take a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, looking out over the beautiful, waking city. I am now the official head of research at the Nova Genetics Lab, leading a brilliant team of scientists. My smartphone chimes softly on the glass patio table. It is a text message from Grandma Beatrice. She has sent a beautiful, vibrant photograph of a newly bloomed yellow rose in her Napa Valley garden. I smile, feeling a profound, absolute sense of relief wash over my soul. Every ounce of the old, suffocating resentment has been entirely swept away. By refusing to shed a single weak tear, I proved a fundamental truth. The most perfect, devastating revenge is not found in screaming matches or physical violence. True justice is stripping the wicked of their unearned arrogance, using their own bottomless greed as the ultimate weapon against them, and then quietly walking away to live a brilliant, spectacular life they will never, ever be allowed to touch. Thank you so much, from the bottom of my heart, for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and felt a sense of justice, please consider helping our channel with a small donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment. Your generous support is the only way we can pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families, and allowing us to continue creating these highly engaging stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.